Good morning and welcome to our continuing story through the Bible in a year. And now we're looking at an introduction to the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, one of the greatest stories, the greatest autobiographies, one of the earliest autobiographies in world history. One of the greatest stories in the Bible because it's a story about how people pull together under a vision and get things done. You know, the first group of people who come back to war-ravaged Judea were shocked at just the scale of the devastation and the poverty and the neglect that was there. You know, the prophet Zechariah and Haggai come back and they rebuild the temple as a center of worship for God's people, but faith is low and spirits are even lower as people kind of live in this hopeless kind of place where 100 years just drags by really, really slowly. And in the Persian capital, Sushan, there's a man who is from a Judean exiled family generations before, who's worked his way up to be someone who's got on well in the world, is the phrase that's used, and is serving in the court there, in the government. And his name is Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is sent back to want to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. And he goes back to assess what the damage has been, what the walls are, because, you know, it's no good having a city that's got no walls because you can't protect yourself against your enemies. You can't have trade and commerce and all of these kind of things that are happening. And because of that war-ravaged state that they're living in, the economics of the country are awful, and inflation is sky high for these people. So there's this urgent need for protection, for the ability to live and function as a society, for these walls to be rebuilt. But it's going to be a mammoth task, and in the face of their enemies, and to pull people together in order to get the job done. And there's this wonderful account you'll see in Nehemiah where different people are rebuilding sections of the walls literally outside of their homes. And you've got the bakers who rebuild the section of the wall in front of their workplaces, and these families rebuild the section of the walls in front of where they live, and everyone is playing their part. You know, no one person is doing a big huge section of the wall, but everyone is doing the thing that's in front of them. And it's together, as everyone does that the great vision of the walls being rebuilt slowly starts to happen. And it seems really hard, you know, and as they're going through it, there's a real challenge because, you know, in the midst of that project, when you've moved on from the initial vision and yet the end is far from sight, that's when it's easy to get discouraged. That's when it's easy to struggle to see how it's all going to turn out. And we find that in our lives, don't we? That when we've started something, sometimes we've moved on from that initial enthusiasm, that initial burst, and the end result seems not guaranteed and a long way off. And we're kind of in this middle period where it's easy to become despondent. It's easy to become discouraged what's going on. But slowly and surely, spoiler alert, they rebuild the walls of the city. And it's this amazing story of how that happens. But again, there is this, there's a temptation to look back at Ezra that we've looked at, and to look at Nehemiah and to think, well, one of them's spiritual, one of them's practical, we'll separate the two out. But actually there is in both a practical and a spiritual nature to the life of the nation. And Nehemiah knows that there needs to be this rebuilding of the identity of the nation as a worshipping community in order for the walls to mean anything at all. And there's the rededication of the walls, or the dedication of the walls to God, but also the rededication of God's people, and the role that God's word plays in that. And there's that wonderful parallel, isn't there, that the rebuilding of the walls is happening at the same time as the rebuilding of the spiritual life of the nation. And so there's this moving together practically and spiritually in the life of the people of God, where scripture is made plain and clear to people, where people are able to grasp it and understand it and study it for themselves, where all of that takes place in the context of worship, the worship of God at the temple, and the festivals that are re-established there as well. And for us, as we think about the practicalities of being a church, we're here in this building and there's practical issues. There's a leak in the room just over there that we're going to be having a Bible study in later, unless of course it's been fixed in the time since I recorded this. But there are problems. We had a leak in the roof last year that cost thousands of pounds to repair. There's the practical things. You've got to fill volunteer rotas, and a shout out to many of you who volunteer in various different capacities in the church. God bless you for all that you do. But there's those practical challenges of, do we have enough people to do the work, and so on. But at the same time, there is that heart of knowing that actually the building itself and the volunteer opportunities that we have, if we don't have worship at the heart of who we are, then it's pretty pointless. This building is pretty pointless. What we do in the cafe and in other areas as well is pretty pointless if we're not living as the people that God has called us to be. And we each have a part to play in that. We each have a role to play. No one of us is called to do it all. I'm not called to do it all. You are not called to do it all. But we are called, like those people who built the wall, to do the bit that's in front of us, to do what we can in the areas that we are in, to make a difference. And as we all join together in doing that, we're doing the thing that's in front of us, serving in that way, continuing on, even if it takes a long time, even if it's hard, to be part of that bigger vision together. Our vision is to be a church at the centre of community. We express that in our community with God. That's the centrality of that worshipping life was key in the rebuilding of the nation under Ezra and Nehemiah. We're called to be a community with each other. And that's key, because if there's only one group of people, then only that one section of wall is going to be built. It's pretty useless. We need to work together. We need to grow together in our life as we seek to follow God. But also community with others. The call of God's people was always to be a light to the nations, to reach out and to have a place to do that. And so is our mission and our ministry reaching out beyond where we are. We need that secure base like the people of Nehemiah's time in order to live as those people, but so that we might have a wider reach, so that we might reach out into the world and live as God's people there. So there's lots of overlap, isn't there, in Scripture between what we read that happened, half a millennium BC. You're reading about events that happened 2,500 years ago, and with our life today. And that's relevant for us. And, we might read Scripture and struggle to connect sometimes with what's going on. But if we come prayerfully to say, Lord, would you reveal to me how this is relevant to my life as I seek to follow you today, then I believe that by His Spirit, God will make those words come alive for you. And that's my prayer as we read through this incredible story of the rebuilding of the walls in Nehemiah together.